how would your 80-year-old self be looking at your life right now? Would they be happy? Would they be content? Would they desire more, right? And if the answer is they would have wanted more for you, that's okay. There's still time. And that enlightenment that you may be having with that conversation will allow you then to get started, to hopefully take action. Welcome back, everybody. We are back, brand new week on the Cabral concept. Couldn't be more excited to bring you today's Mindset and Motivation Monday topic, which is the Solomon's Paradox. I personally had never heard about this before. I don't know how, but I learned about it in one of the strangest ways. So a friend of a friend, basically a colleague of a colleague, introduced me to Alex Hormozi's work. Alex Hormozi is probably one of the most well-known, best, maybe entrepreneurial coaches out there for free on YouTube, teaching about his business building, I guess, acumen, right? Like really great at that particular thing. So not necessarily in the same field of me, but I like to learn from every individual. Someone sent me the video and they said, hey, have you ever heard of this? This is an interesting topic. It's called the Solomon's Paradox. I'd never heard about it before, not in the way that it's put right now. And I figured if I hadn't, maybe you hadn't as well. So I wanted to bring it to you. And again, I look at all sources of information, all sources of truth. I'd love to be able to take that, fully integrate it, right, as an integrative health practitioner and share it with others. So if you've never heard about the Solomon's Paradox before, it's based off of the biblical king Solomon. And how it states is this: it's a psychological phenomenon where individuals demonstrate greater cognitive insight and wisdom when contemplating other people's problems compared to their own. What does that mean? It means that oftentimes you're better at helping other people with their issues than helping yourself. And we all seem to be that way, like we really do. And there's a solve for this. And I'm going to share it with you after we look at, a few of these specific examples. But if you think about it, let's say, you're a health coach, or you're a dating coach, or you're a business coach, or any of those specific things, or you're just, you're good in a specific area. People may come to you with that advice, or you're really good at giving that advice, but you're not so good at taking it, right? Because of these different blocks. I want to share with you, which I find very fascinating, 6 specific details of this paradox, and then I'm going to share with you how to overcome it that I learned from Alex. So the first one is this: there's wisdom in other people's problems, right? So there's wisdom in their problems. So people often show remarkable wisdom, empathy, and thoughtfulness when considering someone else's issues or life's decisions. They're able to analyze the situation from a more distant perspective, weighing different aspects and potential outcomes. What does that mean? It means that when you're looking at someone else's life versus your own, there's more empathy. There's more perspective. I would say you're a lot gentler. You're not as hard on that individual. Now, again, I'm going to share with you at the end, but what if you did that with yourself? Why aren't you doing that with yourself? The second one is this: lack of insight into personal problems. So, different than the first, when dealing with your own problems or significant life decisions, these same individuals, meaning you and I, right, may exhibit a lack of insight, poor judgment, or impulsivity. They may become emotionally involved, and their thinking can be clouded by personal biases and desires. So think about this. You are not necessarily personally involved when giving someone else advice, meaning you're not taking that advice, you're giving it to them. They're the one who's going to be doing it. So if someone's coming to you with a crazy idea, you might say, that doesn't seem like a good idea. Here's reason A, B, and C why it's not a good idea. Did you think about this? Did you think about the consequences? Where sometimes we don't always think about the consequences of our decisions. The third insight is this: using King Solomon as an example. So the paradox is named after King Solomon. So he was someone written about in the Hebrew Bible with great wisdom. So people came to King Solomon for his wisdom. So despite his ability to make fair and wise judgments with others, King Solomon's personal life was marked by decisions that were often seen as unwise or contradictory to his public wisdom. So it's this. It is not taking your own advice. It's not walking the talk. So how many of us, maybe even on social media, talk the talk, but we don't walk the talk, right? We're not walking the walk, as some people would also say. Really important we look at that. Psychological explanations is the fourth point. The Solomon's paradox can be partly explained by psychological distance. When we think about other people's problems, we have a more detached and objective view. This distance allows us to more abstractly and creatively to consider long-term consequences. When it comes to our own problems, emotional involvement, immediate needs, and personal biases often take over, which leads to then less wise decision-making. Because when you make an emotional, impulsive decision, it oftentimes doesn't take into all of the facts, right, that's needed in the situation, and it's not looking at the long-term consequences. So when we're dealing with other people, we can step back. We can take that 30,000-foot view. We can look down on the situation. We can ask more insightful questions. Asking more insightful questions leads to better answers, which leads to better outcomes. It's what I like to say, sleep on it, right? The sleep on it methodology. The next one is this, practical implications, our second to last one. Understanding Solomon's paradox can be valuable in various contexts, such as counseling, leadership, and personal development. Recognizing that we may not always be the best judge of our own situations might lead to seeking outside perspectives and more thoughtful self-reflection. So when you encounter a problem, just like a friend of yours, family member, coworker came to you, maybe you should go to someone else. And I'm going to end with that in just a moment. Research and studies is point number 6. There's been multiple studies right now examining this paradox in psychological research. Some findings suggest that taking an outsider's perspective on your own personal problems, a technique sometimes called self-distancing, can lead to a wiser reasoning and better decision-making. And here's why. You are looking at you, not as you. Instead, you're looking at the problem, the situation, the challenge, the obstacle that needs to be overcome. Not your problem, challenge, obstacle, right? It's not yours. You're looking at the problem just as you would for an outsider. It's not easy to be done or not easy to do, but it can be overcome. You can do this. And oftentimes the way that I've always recommended this, because even though I've never known it as the Solomon's paradox, I've understood it, I've used it before. Just like I'd used the 12-week year for years previous to reading the book, The 12-Week Year, right? It's like, but then you see it, you learn about it, and you're like, oh, someone refined it. This is great, right? So now I get to refine it to a greater degree. And I get to ask this question, which I'm going to share with you in just one moment, that I learned from Alex, is I've always taught clients, and I've done it myself, to journal. So what you want to do, because like if your mind is always spinning, you can't turn your mind off, especially at night. What I will do if this happens is I will get up and I will write down what I'm thinking. I will write down the problem. I will write down the potential challenge that I'm trying to overcome, the obstacles that I'm trying to overcome, the objections to it, the ultimate goal, the fears. I will write it all down. And I will look at it then more as text on a page than my own emotions. And then I will say, how would I help someone else with this same exact issue? And if after I get my own decision, I will oftentimes then seek out an expert in that field for their guidance and wisdom on what I wrote down in a journal. So like there's almost no downside to it, because either way, I can then just go back to bed and fall asleep. Why? Because I don't need to think about the problem anymore. It's there for me tomorrow. Your brain will keep working through these if it thinks it needs to remember it and continue down that path trying to solve it the whole night. Not a good idea. Write it down. It's going to be there, right? And you start to write down and look at all the different fears and objections and challenges, but also why you're trying to overcome it in the first place. It's a great way to do it. Now, instead of asking a coach, an expert, etc., for advice, there's someone else you can ask, and that's you, but not the current you. Asking the 80-year-old you. And the advice that Alex gave was this. There's no one in the world who knows you better than you. Like that's really it. You've had to live with you your whole life, right? For better or for worse. So the thing is, you want to look back, not as you, but the older, the wiser, the kinder, the more mature, the gentler 80-year-olds who's more like a great-grandparent that wants to share with you the wisdom that they've accumulated through life. And they want to share with you that a lot of what you're worried about right now doesn't matter by the time you get to 80 years old, 90 years old, 100 years old, what we're trying to do in HPH, right? So it's a great mindset to now look at this. So first you write down your whole problem that I talked with you about. But then you ask yourself, what would the 80-year-old me say? What would the advice be from my 80-year-old self to my whatever, 40-year-old, 45, 50, like however old your age is? What advice would they give you? So you're going to state the problem, and then you're going to look for that advice. It's essentially a meditation. You are meditating on the problem, the goal, the obstacle that you're facing right now. And when you begin to do this, you're asking a different side of you that probably already has the answer for advice. I found this to be remarkable. I think it's a great way of looking at this. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't seek out coaches or other experts. You should. But you should also seek out your own advice using self-distancing as the 80-year-old you. And I say this, how would you answer your current self at 80 years old? And how would your 80-year-old self be looking at your life right now? Would they be happy? Would they be content? Would they desire more, right? And if the answer is they would have wanted more for you, that's okay. There's still time. And that enlightenment that you may be having with that conversation will allow you then to get started, to hopefully take action, to begin to reach your full potential, to understand that there'll always be challenges in life. There'll always be obstacles. There always has been. It's always been written about since the dawn of time, since King Solomon's time, right? It's always been written about. The goal is not to try to get rid of all of the challenges and obstacles in life. The goal is to simply set up a worthy goal, a goal that's worth going through all the obstacles and all the challenges, so that when you meet your 80-year-old self, you can look back and say, that was a life well lived. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's Mindset and Motivation Monday. I'm so happy that you're a part of this community. I thank you. I appreciate you. As always, if this podcast, if this episode, if this video was helpful, do feel free to share it with anyone you believe it could serve. Thanks so much for tuning into today's show. Before you go, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I want to make sure that you're getting our daily content, not missing out on anything functional medicine, wellness, weight gain, weight loss, anti-aging, living longer, stronger, and all of the most cutting-edge research. And if there's any topics you want to hear, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Take care.